Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time the question comes to us from Jack, who asked, "Hey Thor, what is your opinion on midi-chlorians? I feel they have ruined the Force for me due to the fact that they make the Force less spiritual and more technical." Okay, so I think the absolute biggest problem I have with midi-chlorians is that they do begin to quantify the Force. They put a number on Force potential, which just seems to go against not only how we perceive the Force to be in the original trilogy, but also makes it feel a little bit less about faith and hard work or training, and more about if you just won the roll of the dice and got a high M count or not. Which, sure, as far as we know, is kind of how it works or worked in Star Wars with the Force already. It does seem that Force sensitivity is already random, and some certainly have more potential with it than others, and that for those who are, say, only slightly Force sensitive, no amount of training will ever see them become a Jedi. Kind of the same way no amount of training will help you make it to the NBA if you didn't also win the genetic lottery, if you will. And then on the flip side, just because you have a high midi-chlorian count doesn't mean you can skip the training part, or at least it shouldn't. As we see with Anakin, who had the highest known count ever, he still needed plenty of training to tap into and hone all that ability or potential. And so the problem with midi-chlorians isn't so much that they exist as this sort of gateway between the living Force and the cosmic Force, as learned about in the Clone Wars animated series. But the problem is, with a simple blood test, we can tell someone's potential with the Force ahead of time, which, sure, for the Jedi is rather convenient, isn't it? In less than a minute, they can figure out what they're working with when they find a Force-sensitive child, for example, and they don't then waste their time, many years potentially, trying to train someone who never had a chance to become a Jedi in the first place. But again, the issue I have is that it boils the Force down to a number, and it starts to make Star Wars feel more like a hard magic system over a soft one, or a system that has defined rules and limits and is explainable, rather than one that's more wide open and unknown and just flat out mysterious. Or also, as the comment originally pointed out, it starts to make the Force feel less spiritual and more technical or scientific instead. Which I actually do think is what George Lucas was going for in the long run. I think Lucas had some big ideas for the Force that grew over time in his head, and like with a lot of mad geniuses, I mean that in the best possible way, he wanted people to understand the big picture he had in his head and had created. He wanted people to see it, to know and understand there was much more to Star Wars and the Force than just cool powers and the battle of good versus evil. And I mean, if you've heard what he has said about his sequel trilogy, you'll know it was going to get into the microbiotic realm, with him even saying that there's this world of creatures that operates differently than we do. I call them the Wills, and the Wills are the ones who actually control the universe. They feed off the Force. He also said that those in the Star Wars galaxy were kind of like cars for the Wills, and that they're vehicles for the Wills to travel around in, and the conduit is the midi-chlorians. The midi-chlorians are the ones that communicate with the Wills. The Wills, in a general sense, they are the Force. And all this kind of makes it sound like the Wills are sentient little creatures that experience life through us, or through the people in the Star Wars galaxy, and that the will of the Force is simply their will. Hell, it's right in the name. And that those who are Force sensitive can hear the midi-chlorians, who Lucas said communicate with the Wills, and thus they can help carry out the will of the Wills that will lead to balance, or so I'm kind of guessing here. And though that all sounds certainly rather creative and interesting, if not what I think most people want out of Star Wars or want it to be, or to be the backbone of the Force, I'd still personally absolutely love to know more about all this. I'd love to have George Lucas explain it all to us, simply so we can just know what his big picture was, even if, again, a lot of people, as he himself said or predicted when he discussed all this, would have hated it. And assuming all this was indeed in his outlines given to Disney, I think it's all a big part of the reason why they did not go with his version of the sequels. I think they thought that delving into the microbiotic realm would have been the end of Star Wars, especially after midi-chlorians were not so well received back in the day of the prequels. Nevertheless, no matter how you may feel about all this, about exploring the microbiotic realm in the sequels, it did sound like George had some ideas for them that were a bit more palatable, if not downright good and exciting, like him wanting Darth Maul to be the main villain of the sequels after he had united all the crime syndicates to fill the vacuum or void left after the fall of the Empire, which is rather interesting considering the foundation for that seems to be set up in the Clone Wars, where Maul organizes the crime syndicates to take over Mandalore. Either way here, it obviously didn't happen that way. The sequels were what they were, and we're unlikely to ever exactly know what George Lucas himself had in mind for the Force, or how it all works and what the wills were and all of that. Well, that's all I got for you this time, a true lightning response. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think George Lucas's sequels would have been like, and what you think his ideas for the Force really were based on the few little things he's said about it. Or, of course, you can always leave a question for a future lightning response video. Just start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.